Good evening. We're here today to discuss one of the most significant and troubling political developments of this week, a situation that reveals deep fractures in American political discourse and raises fundamental questions about who we are as a nation. Over the past several days, we've witnessed a series of events that demand our careful attention and thoughtful analysis. This isn't just another political story that will fade by tomorrow's news cycle. This is about the treatment of American citizens, the rhetoric of leadership, and the very soul of our democracy. Let me start by laying out what happened. On Tuesday, during a cabinet meeting at the White House, President Donald Trump launched into an extended verbal assault on Somali immigrants, particularly those in Minnesota. Trump called Representative Ilhan Omar, a Somali-American congresswoman, and other Somali immigrants, using language that described them in dehumanizing terms, stating he didn't want them in the country. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or an off-the-cuff remark taken out of context. This was a sustained, deliberate attack made on camera during an official government meeting, with cabinet members present and Vice President J.D. Vance reportedly expressing agreement. But this didn't end on Tuesday. Wednesday brought more of the same, with the president doubling down on his statements. He claimed that Somali immigrants had ruined Minnesota and the country, and suggested that Representative Omar shouldn't be permitted to serve in Congress. Think about that for a moment. An American citizen, elected by her constituents to represent them in the United States Congress, being told by the president that she should be expelled from the country of her citizenship and removed from office. Now, let's understand who we're talking about when we discuss the Somali community in Minnesota. Minnesota is home to the largest Somali community in the United States, with more than 61,000 people of Somali ancestry living there. These aren't just statistics. These are families, business owners, teachers, healthcare workers, and yes, elected officials. Most Somalis initially arrived in the United States as refugees fleeing a devastating civil war in the early 1990s. They were granted refuge under programs established during the presidency of George H.W. Bush, a Republican president. Approximately 73% of Somali immigrants are naturalized citizens. These are Americans we're talking about. Representative Ilhan Omar's personal story embodies the American dream in many ways. She fled Somalia's civil war as a child, spent years in a refugee camp in Kenya, and came to the United States at age 12. She learned English, excelled in school, became a citizen, served in her state legislature, and was eventually elected to the United States Congress. She represents Minnesota's 5th Congressional District, an area that includes Minneapolis and surrounding communities. Whether you agree with her politics or not, her story is one of remarkable achievement and integration into American civic life. Her response to the president's attacks has been measured but firm. On social media, she stated simply that the president's obsession with her is unsettling and expressed hope that he would receive help. In subsequent interviews, she emphasized that Somali Americans are here to stay and won't be intimidated or scapegoated. She pointed out that it's not surprising the president would target black immigrants who are also Muslim, noting the pattern of his rhetoric. Let's talk about the context that supposedly prompted these remarks. There have been reports of fraud schemes involving some members of Minnesota's Somali community, specifically related to pandemic relief programs. The New York Times published an investigation detailing law enforcement claims that fraud took root in pockets of Minnesota's Somali diaspora over the past 5 years. This is serious and should be investigated and prosecuted. Criminal behavior is criminal behavior, regardless of who commits it. But here's where we need to apply critical thinking. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who served as the Democratic vice presidential candidate in 2024, has addressed this issue directly. He's made clear that fraudsters are being prosecuted and sent to jail. He's also pointed out something crucial. You cannot and should not demonize an entire community based on the actions of a few individuals. This is a basic principle of justice and fairness that most of us learned as children. When some people from any community commit crimes, you prosecute those individuals. You don't condemn everyone who shares their ethnicity, religion, or place of origin. Consider the scale we're discussing here. There were 76,000 people of Somali descent living in Minnesota in 2024, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, and more than half were born in the United States. So we're talking about a community where the majority are native-born Americans, children who've never known any other home. Even among those born in Somalia, the vast majority are law-abiding citizens who work, pay taxes, raise families, and contribute to their communities. To characterize this entire population based on the criminal actions of a relative handful is not just unfair, it's fundamentally un-American. What makes this situation even more concerning is the reported preparation of targeted immigration enforcement operations in Minnesota. Multiple news sources have indicated that Immigration and Customs Enforcement may be planning operations specifically focused on the Somali community. While a Department of Homeland Security spokesperson stated that enforcement targets those in the country illegally regardless of race or ethnicity, the timing and context raise obvious questions about whether this is truly neutral enforcement or targeted harassment. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey has been vocal in his support for the Somali community, stating that the city is home to more than 80,000 Somali immigrants and that most are U.S. citizens. He warned that when federal immigration agents conduct mass operations, they will inevitably detain the wrong people. This isn't theoretical. We've seen this happen in previous immigration enforcement sweeps. American citizens get caught up, detained, separated from their families, and have to prove their citizenship while held in custody. This is especially likely when enforcement is based on ethnic or community targeting rather than individualized suspicion of immigration violations. Now let's examine the broader pattern here. This isn't the first time President Trump has attacked Representative Omar or Somali immigrants. In 2019, he infamously told Omar and 3 other congresswomen of color, collectively known as the Squad, to go back to the countries they came from. Except 3 of the 4 were born in the United States, and Omar is a naturalized citizen. In 2018, he referred to African nations using extremely crude language. More recently, he's claimed, without evidence, that hundreds of thousands of Somali refugees were taking over Minnesota and forming violent gangs. What's striking about the current situation is how the political landscape has shifted. When Trump made his remarks Tuesday, Republican members of Congress stayed quiet, while Vice President J.D. Vance reportedly banged the table in agreement, and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt characterized Trump's remarks as amazing. Think about that. What would have been considered career-ending rhetoric just a few years ago is now celebrated within the administration and met with silence from most elected Republicans. This normalization of dehumanizing rhetoric is perhaps the most dangerous aspect of what we're witnessing. Political scientists and civil rights advocates have noted that we're seeing something unprecedented in modern American presidential discourse. Previous presidents, even those criticized for racial undertones in their messaging, never engaged in this kind of explicit, sustained attack on specific ethnic and religious communities. There are real-world consequences to this rhetoric beyond hurt feelings or political positioning. After Trump's statements about Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, during the 2024 campaign, threats against that community spiked dramatically. Businesses closed, legal residents fled the city out of fear, and the entire community lived under the shadow of potential violence. Now, community leaders in Minnesota are reporting that Somali-Americans, including some who voted for Trump, are expressing genuine fear for their safety. Let's think about what this means for American values and constitutional principles. The First Amendment protects freedom of religion, which means you cannot single out Muslims for different treatment. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the law, which means you cannot target people for enforcement based on their ethnicity. These aren't abstract legal concepts. They're foundational American principles established to prevent exactly this kind of discriminatory government action. Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota disputed Trump's characterization of Somali immigrants as problematic for the state. Minneapolis Mayor Frey stated he's proud to have a large Somali community in his city. These local leaders, who actually know and work with these communities daily, are painting a very different picture from the one coming out of the White House. They speak of hard-working families, successful businesses, civic engagement, and positive contributions to Minnesota's economy and culture. The irony here shouldn't be lost on anyone. America has always been a nation of immigrants and refugees. The very idea of America is that people fleeing persecution, poverty, and violence can find opportunity and freedom here. That's not some modern liberal invention. It's woven into the fabric of who we've been since our founding. The Statue of Liberty doesn't say, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," unless they're from countries we don't like. The whole point is that your potential isn't determined by where you were born but by what you're willing to work for. Now, I want to address something important. It's entirely legitimate to discuss immigration policy, border security, and the pace and scale of refugee resettlement. People can disagree in good faith about these complex policy questions. What's not legitimate is attacking American citizens and legal residents based on their ethnicity and religion. What's not legitimate is calling human beings garbage. What's not legitimate is telling an elected American official that she should be expelled from Congress and the country. Consider the message this sends to young Somali-Americans, children who were born in Minnesota or came here as babies, who speak English as their first language, who go to American schools, who pledge allegiance to the American flag. What does it tell them when the President of the United States says their community has destroyed the country? What does it tell them about their place in America, about whether they truly belong, about whether their citizenship means anything? And what about the message to other communities? If the President can talk this way about Somalis today, which community will be next? Mexican Americans? Chinese Americans? Arab Americans? Any group that becomes politically convenient to scapegoat? This isn't about defending any one community, it's about defending the principle that you cannot target Americans based on their ethnicity or religion. Let me be clear about something else. Crime should be prosecuted. Fraud should be prosecuted. If anyone, Somali or otherwise, has stolen government funds, they should face justice. But prosecution should be based on evidence against individuals, not ethnic profiling of entire communities. That's what the rule of law means. That's what equal justice means. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison has indicated he may seek legal recourse if the president attempts to immediately revoke temporary protected status for Somalis, as Trump has threatened to do. The federal government is required by statute to provide 60 days notice before ending TPS protections, and Ellison argues that using this authority to discriminate against an ethnic group or target a specific state would be legally problematic. This is likely to become a significant legal battle, one that will test whether presidential authority can be wielded in discriminatory ways. The broader question facing us is what kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a nation that welcomes those fleeing persecution and gives them a chance to build new lives? Do we want to be a nation where your ethnicity and religion don't determine how you're treated by your government? Do we want to be a nation where elected officials can't be told they don't belong in Congress because of where they were born? Or are we moving toward something darker? A nation where the president can use his platform to dehumanize entire communities? Where being the wrong ethnicity or religion makes you a target for harassment regardless of your citizenship? Where political leaders stay silent in the face of obvious bigotry because speaking up might hurt them politically? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're being answered right now through the actions we take or don't take, the voices we raise or keep silent, the lines we draw or allow to be crossed. I want to close with this thought. Throughout American history, there have always been voices saying that the newest group of immigrants is different, that they can't assimilate, that they're a threat to American culture. This was said about the Irish, about Italians, about Jews, about every wave of immigration. And every time, those voices have been proven wrong. The children and grandchildren of those immigrants became teachers, doctors, soldiers, business owners, and yes, members of Congress. They didn't make America less American. They expanded and enriched what it means to be American. The Somali community in Minnesota is following that same path. They're building lives, raising families, starting businesses, participating in democracy. Representative Ilhan Omar, whatever you think of her politics, represents the possibility that America offers. She went from a refugee camp to the halls of Congress in one lifetime. That's an American story. We're at a moment where we need to decide whether we still believe in that story. Whether we still believe that America is defined not by ethnicity or religion but by commitment to shared democratic values. Whether we still believe that all Americans deserve equal dignity and respect regardless of where they or their parents were born. This is about more than one community or one politician. It's about the soul of our nation. It's about who we are and who we want to be. And the answer to that question will be determined not just by what the president says but by how the rest of us respond, by whether we speak up for our neighbors, defend the vulnerable, and insist on the basic dignity of every person. That's what's at stake here. Not just for Somali-Americans, but for all of us. Because an attack on one community's right to be treated with dignity is ultimately an attack on everyone's rights. If we allow this to be normalized, if we stay silent, we're not just failing the Somali community. We're failing ourselves and failing the promise of America. Thank you.